Which of my daughters would you like? The father asked the Amish man. The crowd went silent. One daughter was clever. Another was beautiful. But when the Amish man spoke, jaws dropped. I want the fat one. Gasps filled the church hall. Was it a cruel joke, or the beginning of something no one expected? Because this quiet man wasn't after beauty or riches. He saw a strength no one else would claim. And for the daughter long mocked by her own kin, it was the first time anyone had chosen her. But just as hope flickered, whispers spread: debts, water rights, and betrayal. A family farm on the brink. A father ready to gamble it all away. And the Amish man accused of siding with the very people the town feared most. As the snow falls and tensions rise, did he choose her out of love or for something far more dangerous? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Lantern light cast dancing shadows on the walls of the one-room church as fiddle music warmed the cold Colorado winter evening. The social gathering buzzed with life, bringing townsfolk together despite the bitter chill of 1882. Sweet scents of apple and cherry pies mingled with fresh coffee, though Mark Yoder politely declined the steaming cup offered. To him, "No thank you, Mrs. Bennett," he said softly, his plain black coat marking him apart from the other men's western wear. "We plain folk don't partake." The widow Bennett nodded, uncertain but respectful of the Amish man's ways. She hurried off to gossip with other church ladies about the newest rumors: who owed money to whom, which families might sell their land come spring, and most importantly, who might marry before the winter's end. Mark sat quietly on a wooden bench, his worn Bible resting in his lap. He observed the gathering with careful eyes, noting how the townspeople clustered in their usual groups. The banker's wife held court near the pie table, while ranch hands gathered near the door, stamping their boots and sharing tobacco. Louis Hargrave stumbled through the crowd, his face flushed from more than just the cold. The farmer's clothes hung loose on his frame, telling the story of hard times that his proud words tried to hide. He gripped a coffee cup that smelled more of whiskey than beans. "My girls," he announced to no one in particular, "prettiest in the territory." His voice carried above the fiddle music, drawing unwanted attention. "Smart too, better than their fool father deserves." Mark watched as Luce's three daughters reacted to their father's display. Clara, the eldest, turned away in elegant embarrassment, her slender form drawing admiring glances from young men nearby. Rachel, sharp-featured and quick, rolled her eyes and muttered something that made her friends snicker. And Martha, plain, plump Martha, seemed to shrink into herself, pressing closer to the rough-hewn wall as if hoping to disappear into the shadows. Louis swayed, his boot heel scraping against the wooden floor, as he made his way toward Mark's bench. "You're alone out there on that homestead, ain't you, Amish man?" He dropped heavily onto the bench, sloshing his drink. "Since your wife passed?" The crowd quieted, fiddle music faltering. Mark sat straight-backed, dignity in every line of his body. "That is so," he answered simply. Luce's laugh held no humor. "Well then," he gestured wildly toward his daughters. "Take your pick. Which of my daughters would you like, Amish man?" The church fell silent, except for a few nervous titters. Clara's face flamed red with mortification. Rachel's mouth dropped open in shock. Martha seemed to stop breathing entirely, her eyes fixed on the floor. Mark rose slowly to his feet. He was not a tall man, but something in his bearing commanded attention. His clear gaze swept over the three sisters, taking in Clara's beauty, Rachel's sharp intelligence, and finally settling on Martha. He studied her with such intentness that she lifted her eyes, meeting his look with confusion and the smallest spark of something that might have been hope. "I want the fat one," Mark declared, his voice steady and sure in the stunned silence. The crowd erupted. Some laughed cruelly, others gasped in shock. A few older women clucked their tongues in disapproval at Luce's behavior. Clara covered her mouth with one hand. Whether to hide horror or amusement wasn't clear. Rachel's eyes narrowed calculatingly. Between her sister and the Amish farmer, Martha's face bloomed crimson. Her hands trembled as they clutched her shawl tighter. Years of mockery had taught her to expect cruelty in any attention, but there was something different in Mark's direct gaze. He hadn't sneered the word fat like others did. He'd stated it plainly, like any other fact. The sky is blue, water is wet, Martha is fat. And then he'd kept looking at her, calm and steady, as if he saw something worth seeing. Lee staggered to his feet, bluster warring with confusion on his face. "You're serious?" he demanded, squinting at Mark. "I am," Mark replied simply. His eyes hadn't left Martha's face. The social broke into clusters of whispered conversation. Martha stood frozen, caught between the urge to flee into the dark winter night and the strange new feeling blooming in her chest. No one had ever chosen her first. No one had ever chosen her at all. The evening ended in a buzz of murmurs and meaningful looks. As people gathered their coats and empty pie tins, the frost-laden air filled with speculation about what would come of this shocking development. Martha slipped out early, but not before catching one last glimpse of Mark Yoder's steady gaze. Following her departure, the winter moon hung bright and full above the church as people filed out into the crisp night air. Lise Hargrave stumbled on the steps, his boots catching on the worn wood. Martha rushed forward, catching her father's arm before he could fall. "Here, Pa," she murmured, steadying him. "Let me help you to the wagon." Louise laughed, the sound harsh. "In the quiet night, help me. You're the one needs help, girl." Being picked by that plain man like some last sheep at auction. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they made their way across the churchyard. Clara and Rachel trailed behind, their whispers carrying in the still air. "Can you imagine?" Clara's voice dripped with disdain. "Martha, of all people. What would an Amish man want with her?" Rachel snickered. "Maybe he needs someone strong enough to pull his plow come spring." Martha's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes forward, focused on guiding her father's unsteady steps. The crunch of other boots in the snow made her glance back. Mark Yoder followed at a respectful distance, his black hat straight, his stride purposeful but unhurried. Louise noticed him too. "The Amish fool doesn't know what he's asking," he declared loudly, swaying as Martha tried to help him onto the wagon seat. "Doesn't know what he's getting himself into with this one." "Sir," Mark's calm voice cut through the bitter night air. "Allow me to drive your wagon home. The roads are icy and your horses need a steady hand." Lou squinted at him, pride warring with the reality of his condition. Finally he spat into the snow. "Fine then, show us what you can do, plain man." Martha helped her father into the back of the wagon, where Clara and Rachel had already settled themselves as far from their sister as possible. Mark offered Martha his hand, helping her onto the seat beside him. His touch was firm but gentle, his calloused palm warm despite the cold. As they set out, the wagon's wheels creaked against the frozen ground. The horses' breath came in white puffs, their hooves striking a steady rhythm. Mark handled the reins with quiet confidence, guiding them carefully around icy patches. "My late wife, Rebecca," he said softly, his words meant for Martha alone. "She taught me the value of kindness. She saw worth in things others overlooked." Martha kept her eyes on her mittened hands folded in her lap, hardly daring to breathe. No man had ever spoken to her so directly, so respectfully. "When I saw you tonight," Mark continued, his voice steady as the horse's pace, "I recognized something in your eyes, a steadiness, a patience that comes from bearing others thoughtless, words without letting them break your spirit." Behind them, Clara made a scoffing sound. Rachel whispered something that made their father chuckle darkly. But Martha barely heard them, too focused on Mark's quiet words. "My community in Pennsylvania," he said, They taught me that God's beauty shows itself in unexpected ways, in simple things, in gentle hearts, in steady eyes that stay kind despite unkindness. Martha trembled, not from the cold, but from the strange warmth spreading through her chest. Could he truly mean these things? Could he really see past her sighs, past years of mockery and shame? The wagon crested a small hill, and their farmstead came into view. The house sagged to one side, its weather-beaten boards barely visible in the darkness. A single lamp burned in the kitchen window, casting a weak yellow glow across the snow mark, brought the wagon to a careful stop by the front porch. He climbed down first, then helped Luis navigate the short distance to the door. Martha's sisters hurried inside without a backward glance, but she lingered by the wagon, gathering courage. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the winter wind, "for the ride, and for what you said." Mark tipped his hat, a gesture both proper and gentle. "Good night, Miss Martha." Inside, Clara's sharp voice cut through the darkness. "Well, sister, seems you've found yourself an admirer. Though what he sees in you, perhaps he's blind as well as plain," Rachel added with a smirk. Martha said nothing, removing her shawl and hanging it carefully by the door. Their words, so familiar in their cruelty, seemed to matter less tonight. She held Mark's kindness close to her heart, like a small flame protected from the winter wind. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. Not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. Morning frost painted the fields, white as the sun crept over the eastern hills. Inside the Hargrave farmhouse, Louise woke with his head pounding like a hammer on an anvil. The previous night's whiskey and humiliation churned in his gut as he stumbled to the kitchen table. Martha stood at the wood stove, stirring a pot of morning porridge. The rich smell of coffee filled the small room, though they all knew it was mostly chicory root, real coffee being too dear these days. "My head," Louis growled, slumping into his chair. "Girl, keep that spoon quiet." Clara swept into the kitchen, her hair already neatly braided. "Did you see how everyone stared last night? Pa, that Amish man making a spectacle of our family." "Choosing Martha," Rachel added, sliding onto the bench. "As if he had any right." Luce's face darkened as Martha set bowls before them. "That plain fool, thinking he can walk into our church and pick my daughters like apples from a tree." Martha's hands trembled as she poured the chicory coffee. "He was kind," she whispered, so softly they almost missed it. "He saw me. Really saw me." Luce's fist crashed against the table, making the bowls jump. "Saw you? He saw nothing but a chance to grab land." "What does he own? A broken-down shack and 2 scrawny horses." Martha flinched but stood her ground. "His farm is small, but it's paid for, and he works hard." "Paid for?" Louis sneered. "A patch of dirt and a wooden box he calls a house. Is that what you want? To live like a plain woman, wearing black, speaking their strange German tongue? Better than staying here," Rachel muttered, then shrank under her father's glare. The morning wore on, heavy with tension. Clara kept needling their father about the shame of it all, while Rachel made cutting remarks about Martha's weight, her plain face, her clumsy hands. Near midday, the first neighbor arrived, Sarah Miller, bearing a pie and barely concealed curiosity. "Such excitement at the social," she chirped. "Who would have thought?" More followed, the widow Jenkins with her endless questions, young Tommy Peterson's mother with eggs to trade and gossip to share. Each visitor picked at Luce's pride like vultures on a carcass. By late afternoon, Luce paced the porch, a bottle in his hand. The weight of his debts pressed down like a physical thing. The mortgage past due, seed money owed to half the county. Gambling markers he couldn't meet. 3 daughters to feed and clothe, and not enough coins to do either properly. The sun was setting when Mark Yoder's horse appeared on the road. He rode straight-backed, his black hat steady, a burlap sack tied to his saddle. Martha watched from the window, her heart fluttering like a caught bird. Louise met Mark at the bottom of the porch steps. "Come to gloat, have you?" "No, sir." Mark dismounted, removing his hat. "I've brought a gift, flour and dried beans for your family." He lifted the sack from his saddle, offering it with both hands. Lise didn't move to take it. "Why her?" he demanded, gesturing roughly toward the house. "My Martha's no beauty. She's not clever like Rachel or graceful like Clara. Why choose the fat one?" Inside, Martha pressed her hand to her mouth, tears burning in her eyes. Clara and Rachel crowded beside her at the window, eager for Mark's response. Mark stood quiet for a moment, the sack still extended. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly in the evening air. "Because God showed me her heart is strong." Luce's mouth opened, then closed. For once, the bitter words seemed stuck in his throat. "I saw kindness in her eyes," Mark continued. "Patience in her hands. The strength to endure mockery without becoming cruel. These are worth more than any beauty that fades." Martha's tears fell freely now. Rachel shifted uncomfortably beside her, while Clara's face flushed red. Louis swayed slightly, the bottle forgotten in his hand. "Fine words," he muttered. "But words don't pay debts or put food on the table." "No," Mark agreed. "But honest work does both. I would provide for her, sir. Give her a home where she's valued." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the evening wind and the bare trees. Finally, Louise grabbed the sack of provisions. "You can call tomorrow," he said gruffly. "We'll talk terms then." Martha watched Mark mount his horse, her heart caught between terror and something that felt dangerously like hope. His words echoed in her mind: strong, kind, patient. Was that truly how he saw her? Could she dare to believe it? As Mark rode away, the family retreated from the window. Louise dropped heavily into his chair, staring at the sack of provisions as if it might hold answers to questions he couldn't voice. The winter morning dawned clear and brittle, ice crackling under Mark's wagon wheels as he pulled up to the Hargrave farm. Martha stood on the porch, wrapping her threadbare shawl tighter against the cold. Her father lounged in the doorway, a warning look in his bloodshot eyes. "Mind you don't shame us in town," Lise growled as Martha descended the steps. "Bad enough having an Amish man courting you." Martha ducked her head, cheeks burning despite the cold. But Mark stepped down from the wagon, offering his hand with quiet dignity. "I'll have her back before supper, sir." The wagon creaked as Martha settled onto the wooden seat. Mark had lined it with a wool blanket against the chill, a small kindness that made her throat tight. They set off down the rutted road, the horse's breath steaming in the morning air. The first mile passed in silence, broken only by the rhythm of hooves and wheels. Then Mark spoke, his voice gentle against the winter quiet. "My people believe in living simply. No guns for revenge, no fancy clothes for pride. We trust in God's way." Martha twisted the edge of her shawl. "It must be peaceful," she ventured, "not having to prove yourself all the time." "Yeah, but the work is hard. We labor with our hands, tend the earth." He glanced at her. "Like you do with your garden." She stared at her rough palms. "People say I'm useless. Too big to be graceful, too slow to be clever." Mark's hands tightened on the reins. "The earth does not mock those who tend it well. It rejoices in careful hands, patient hearts." He paused. "I've seen how your father's vegetables grow better than anyone's in the valley. That's your doing, isn't it?" Martha nodded, surprised he had noticed. Most folks only saw what she wasn't, never what she was. The wagon rattled into town, past the telegraph office and the blacksmith shop. Whispers followed them like shadows. Women paused in their errands to stare. Men tipped their hats with smirks barely hidden. Outside the general store, Clara and Rachel huddled with their friends, gloved hands covering giggles as Martha climbed down from the wagon. "Look at her," Clara's voice carried clearly. "Playing." at being a proper lady. Martha's shoulders hunched, but Mark's steady presence beside her gave her courage to straighten them again. Inside the store, he held the door, treating her like any other lady might expect. "What do we need?" he asked, letting her lead the way through the cramped aisles. Martha moved carefully between barrels of flour and beans, conscious of her size. "Sugar," she said softly, "and flour for baking. Pa likes my bread, though he won't say it." Mark followed, carrying her choices without comment. When she hesitated between 2 grades of flour, weighing quality against cost, he waited patiently. For her decision, no correction, no hurrying. Her opinion mattered. At the counter, old Mr. Peterson tallied their purchases with raised eyebrows. But Mark stood quietly while Martha counted out her carefully saved pennies, treating the transaction as perfectly natural. The return journey felt different. Something had shifted like spring earth after frost. Martha found herself sharing small things, how she'd learned to bake from her mother, the wild herbs she gathered for medicine, her hopes for a kitchen garden of her own someday. Mark listened, offering thoughts about crop rotation and the best times for planting. His quiet respect wrapped around her like a warm shawl. For the first time in memory, Martha felt herself smile, not the forced grimace she used to appease her father, but something real and fragile as a crocus pushing through snow. The sun was lowering when they pulled up to the farm. Louis stood waiting, arms crossed. Martha clutched her purchases, that new warmth inside her wavering under his suspicious gaze. Supper that evening was tense. Clara and Rachel traded meaningful looks across their bowls of stew. Louis barely spoke, watching Martha as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't like. But Martha held that seed of hope close inside, remembering Mark's words about the earth rejoicing. Perhaps there was room in the world for someone like her, after all, someone who might value careful hands and a patient heart more than a pretty face or clever tongue. She glanced at her father, saw the worry lines etched deep around his mouth, and quietly served him another helping of stew. Tomorrow would bring its own trials, but for now, she had this, the memory of being treated as someone worth choosing. Morning brought no mercy from winter's bite. Martha pulled her worn shawl tighter as she scattered corn for the chickens, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. The hens clucked and pecked around her boots, their feathers fluffed against the cold. These quiet moments were usually her favorite part of the day, but worry gnawed at her like a hungry rat. The thunder of hoofbeats broke the morning stillness. Martha's heart sank as she recognized the sleek bay horse and its rider, Mr. Calhoun. The banker, his black coat stark against the pale winter sky. She hurried inside to warn her father. Louis Hargrave sat at the kitchen table, nursing his morning coffee. His bloodshot eyes narrowed at the sound of boots on the porch. When Mr. Calhoun stepped through the door, the temperature seemed to drop further. "Mr. Hargrave." The banker's voice was as cold as the morning frost. He remained standing, looking down at Louis with barely concealed disdain. "Your water rights fees are overdue. 3 months now." Martha busied herself at the stove, trying to be invisible while straining to hear every word. Her father's chair creaked as he shifted. "Been a hard winter," Louis muttered. "Crops didn't fetch what we hoped. I don't deal in excuses, Mr. Hargrave." Calhoun cut him off. "Without water rights, you cannot farm. Without farming, you cannot pay your debts. Without payment, the bank will seize this property." His boots clicked against the floorboards as he turned to leave. "You have until the end of the month." The door closed with terrible finality. For a moment, silence filled the kitchen. Then Louis exploded, launching to his feet with a roar. The tin cup in his hand flew across the room, clattering against the wall and spraying coffee everywhere. "Damn him! Damn them all!" Louis' raged, face purple. "They want our land, that's what they want." Martha pressed herself against the wall, trembling. She had seen her father angry before, but this was different. This was the fury of a desperate man, The morning dragged on, heavy with dread. Around noon, the crunch of wagon wheels announced Mark's arrival. Martha's heart lifted despite everything, then plummeted as she saw her father storm out to meet him. Mark climbed down from his wagon, removed his hat respectfully. "Mr. Hargrave, I heard about the water troubles. Come to gloat, have you?" Louise spat. "You're thick with those Utes, ain't you? Planning to take our water with them?" Martha crept closer to the door, stomach knotting. Mark stood steady, hands loose at his sides. "No, sir, I came to offer help. The Amish ways of irrigation, careful channels, working together." "Working together?" Louise laughed bitterly. "While your Ute friends file claims on our stream? The whole town's talking about how you plot with them, speaking their language, taking their side." "I take no one's side but the Lord's," Mark said quietly. "And he teaches us to share his bounty, not fight over it." Martha's heart ached at the gentle wisdom in his words, even as fear churned inside her. The rumors about Mark and the Utes could destroy everything: his reputation, their courtship, perhaps even his safety in a town quick to anger. Lise turned away with a curse, stumbling back inside. Mark's eyes met Martha's through the doorway, filled with sadness but not defeat. She wanted to run to him, explain, apologize, but her father's presence held her back. The afternoon faded into evening. Clara and Rachel's bickering voices filled the kitchen as they argued about whose turn it was to wash dishes. Martha knelt by her bed, a single candle casting wavering shadows on the wall. Her whispered prayers felt small against the weight of all that threatened them: debt, drought, prejudice, hate. "Please, Lord," she murmured, "don't let them destroy Mark's kindness. Don't let hate win." She heard Mark's wagon preparing to leave. Gathering her courage, she slipped out to the porch, carrying something wrapped in a clean cloth. A small loaf of bread she had baked that morning, saving it from the day's batch. Their eyes met in the gathering dusk. No words passed between them as she pressed the bread into his hands, her first freely given gift, a small defiance against all that would tear them apart. His fingers brushed hers, warm despite the cold, and she knew her prayer had already been answered in part. Kindness would not die easily, not while hearts remained soft enough to choose it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frosted ground as Mark's wagon pulled up to the Hargrave farm. Martha stood ready, wrapped in her warmest shawl, heart racing with anticipation. Her father lounged against the porch post, a bottle dangling from his fingers despite the early hour. "Might as well learn what kind of life you're choosing," Louise called out, his voice bitter. His eyes calculated something Martha couldn't read, but she caught his muttered words about debts as she passed. Mark helped Martha onto the wagon seat, his hands steady and sure. The wooden bench creaked as she settled beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. As they set off, the wagon wheels crunched through the thin crust of ice coating the dirt road. They rode in comfortable silence through stands of bare cottonwoods, their branches stark against the winter sky. Martha's breath clouded in the cold air as they crossed a frozen creek, the ice crackling beneath the wagon wheels. Mark pointed out tracks in the snow: deer, rabbit, fox, teaching her to read the story they told. When they crested a small rise, Martha saw Mark's homestead for the first time. The cabin stood plain and square against the landscape, a former line shack that had been carefully mended. Fresh-cut logs were stacked neatly by the door, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "It ain't much," Mark said softly, "but it's honest work that built it." Martha studied the cabin with new eyes, seeing not its modest size but the care in every repaired board and straight corner. "It's beautiful," she whispered, meaning it. They spent the morning setting fence posts and stretching wire. Mark showed her how to test the soil's depth, how to brace the posts just so. Martha's soft hands soon blistered from the work, but she refused to stop. Each post they set felt like a victory. "You have good instincts," Mark told her as she tamped dirt around a post. "Strong spirit, steady hands. The praise warmed her more than the winter sun. No one had ever valued her work before, seeing past her size to recognize her worth. At noon, they paused to share a simple meal of cornbread and apple slices. Mark taught her the Amish way of prayer, heads bowed in quiet gratitude. The silence wrapped around them like a blanket, and Martha felt a peace settle in her soul unlike anything she'd known before. "We thank thee, Lord, for this food and fellowship," Mark prayed in his gentle way. Martha kept her head bowed, letting the unfamiliar words wash over her. Here, away from mocking voices and bitter complaints, she felt closer to God than she ever had in church. They worked until the sun began to sink, casting long purple shadows across the snow. Martha's hands ached, but pride straightened her spine as they loaded the tools into the wagon. She had helped build something today. She had proven herself useful. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought as the early winter dusk gathered around them. When they arrived at the Hargrave farm, Lee stood waiting, swaying slightly from drink. "Look at those hands," he sneered as Martha climbed down, noting her blisters. "Ruined them, did you? What man wants a woman with hands like a field hand?" Martha felt the old shame rising, but something new rose with it. Pride in her day's work, in what those hands had accomplished. "They are strong hands now," she said, her voice clear and steady in the gathering dark. Clara and Rachel, watching from the kitchen window, laughed their sharp laughs. But Luis fell silent, something shifting in his bloodshot eyes as he looked at his middle daughter. Later, lying in her narrow bed, Martha examined her sore hands in the dim light. Blisters were forming on her palms, and dirt was ground into the creases despite scrubbing. But they were good hands, hands that could work and build and create. "I am not useless," she whispered to herself, tasting the truth of it. Outside her window, a storm was building. Wind rattled the loose shutters, and dark clouds scuttered across the moon. But Martha felt anchored by the day's labor, by Mark's quiet respect, by the discovery of her own strength. Whatever changes the storm might bring, she was ready to face them. The wild wind keened around the house corners, but Martha slept soundly. Her blistered hands curled beneath her chin, dreaming of fence posts stretching straight and true across the winter land. Morning light revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had left knee-deep drifts along the road, smooth white waves carved by the wind. Tree branches sagged under their heavy burden of snow, and icicles glinted from every eave in town. At Henderson's Mercantile, a cluster of women gathered near the pot-bellied stove, warming their hands and trading whispers. Their voices dropped when Clara and Rachel Hargrave pushed through the door, bringing a swirl of cold air and fresh gossip. "Poor Martha," Clara said loudly, adjusting her shawl. "She truly believes the Amish man wants her." Her perfect mouth curved in a cruel smile, as if anyone would choose her except to get something else. Rachel, quick to join in, added, "Mark Yoder's just after Pa's water rights. Everyone knows the Amish sided with those Utes over the stream dispute." The town women clucked their tongues, eager for more. Mrs. Henderson paused in her sweeping to lean closer. "Martha's so desperate to escape, she'd believe anything," Clara continued, examining ribbons with careful fingers. "Even that a man would want her for herself." The bell above the door chimed again. Martha stepped inside with Mark close behind, their arms full of split rails for trade. The whispers died instantly, replaced by stares that cut sharper than the winter wind. Martha's cheeks burned as she felt their judgment, their certainty that she was being used. Mark moved through the store with steady grace, nodding politely to each person. He extended his hand to Mr. Henderson, then to others who had been whispering moments before. His calm dignity made their gossip seem small and mean. "Good morning." "To thee," he said clearly, meeting their eyes without flinching. "We've brought fresh-cut rails to trade." The rails were expertly split, the work of skilled hands. Even Mr. Henderson had to admire them before offering coffee beans and sugar in exchange. Through it all, Mark maintained his gentle manner, refusing to acknowledge the sideways glances and muttered comments. On the wagon ride home, fat snowflakes began to fall again. Martha's heart felt as heavy as the laden branches above them. "How do you bear it?" she asked finally. "Their mockery, their cruel words?" Mark's hands were steady on the reins as he considered her question. "Because peace cannot be earned by shouting louder than the crowd," he said at last. "True strength lies in standing firm in what you know to be right." Martha turned his words over in her mind like smooth stones, finding comfort in their wisdom. The wagon creaked through fresh snow, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. That evening, the Hargrave house felt colder than the winter night outside. Levis slouched at the head of the table, a bottle at his elbow. Clara sat with perfect posture, her beauty a sharp weapon aimed at Martha. Rachel's quick tongue darted out barbs between bites of stew. "Saw your Amish man in town today," Louis slurred. "Mighty friendly with them Utes lately. Wonder what he's really after." Martha kept her eyes on her bowl, remembering Mark's words about standing firm. She gathered dishes quietly, letting their bitter comments wash over her like rain. But as she scraped plates at the wash basin, her father's muttered words froze her heart. "Might as well sell the whole cursed place," Luce growled into his cup. Baker offered cash for the water rights. Enough to clear the debts, maybe have something left over. Martha's hands trembled on the tin plates. Selling the farm would mean leaving the land she knew, leaving any chance of a future with Mark. The dream of belonging somewhere, of building a life with someone who saw her true worth, seemed to crumble like dry earth. She glanced out the window into the darkness. Somewhere out there, through the swirling snow, stood Mark's small cabin. She thought of the fence posts they had set together, of his quiet strength in the face of mockery, of his belief in her when no one else had ever looked past her size to see her heart. The dishes clattered as she stacked them. Each one waited with fear for what tomorrow might bring. But beneath the fear, something else was growing, a determination as solid as the fence posts they had planted in frozen ground. She might not be beautiful like Clara or clever like Rachel, but she had found her own kind of strength. Outside, the wind picked up again, driving snow against the window panes. Martha wiped her hands on her apron, her father's threats about selling still ringing in her ears. The dream of belonging threatened to slip away like snow melting in warm hands. Yet she clung to Mark's words about standing firm, even as her heart trembled with uncertainty. Dawn brought a clear sky, the storm clouds finally retreating east. Mark arrived early, his horse's breath steaming in the crisp morning air. Martha stood on the porch, wrapping her worn shawl tighter as he approached. "I have something to show." Mark said softly, extending his hand to help her into the wagon. "A place I hope might mean something to us both." Louis watched from the doorway, his face unreadable, but offered no protest as Martha climbed up beside Mark. The wagon wheels creaked as they set off, snow crunching beneath the horses' hooves. Morning sun sparkled on untouched drifts, making the world seem clean and new. They rode in comfortable silence, Martha stealing glances at Mark's steady profile. His beard was frosted with tiny ice crystals, but his eyes held warmth as he guided the team along the winding trail. After nearly an hour, they turned onto a narrow path that led through a stand of bare cottonwoods. "There," Mark said, pointing ahead. "That's what I wanted to show thee." A small line shack stood in a natural clearing, its rough-hewn logs weathered but solid. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. Mark must have ridden out earlier to start a fire. Martha's heart quickened as they drew closer. This wasn't just any abandoned shelter. This was a place Mark had chosen with purpose. He helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands gentle. At the door, he paused. "It needs work," he said quietly. "But I see something here, something that could be." Inside, warmth from the fireplace pushed back the winter chill. Sunlight streamed through a single window, dust motes dancing in the golden beam. The room was spare. A few plain chairs, a rough table, empty shelves along one wall. But Martha could see Mark's careful touch in the swept floor, the mended shutters, the fresh chinked logs. "Here," Mark said, moving to the window. "I thought we could put a proper table, for meals together and reading scripture." His hand traced the air, painting invisible pictures. "Shelves there, for thy preserves and dried goods. And over here," he gestured to a corner, "a bed, with quilts to keep warm through winter nights." Martha's throat tightened as she listened. No one had ever included her in such dreams before. She ran her hand over a timber beam, feeling the solid strength beneath. Her fingers. "And in the evenings," Mark continued, his voice soft with possibility, "we could sing hymns together. The old songs would sound sweet in these walls, I think." Martha closed her eyes, imagining it. The smell of bread baking, lamplight gleaming on simple furniture, their voices raised together in praise. For the first time in her life, she could picture a future where she wasn't a burden or a joke, but a cherished partner. "Would thee like that?" Mark asked gently. "A simple life, but one built on faith and honest work?" "Yes," Martha whispered, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I would like that very much." They stepped outside into the bright afternoon. Mark led her around the cabin's corner, pointing to where a stream ran clear and narrow through the property. The water sang quietly beneath a thin crust of ice, promising life and growth come spring. "See how the land lies?" Mark traced the slope with his hand. "With careful ditches here and here, the water could serve both this land and thy father's farm. There's plenty, if we tend it right." Martha nodded, understanding blooming. This wasn't just about their future. It was about healing the rift between families, between cultures. Yet she couldn't forget the angry voices in town, the accusations that Mark only courted her for water rights. "Some folks won't want to share," she said softly. "No," Mark agreed. "But water is like God's love. It flows free for all who thirst. We must only learn to share it fairly." The sun was lowering as they started home, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Martha sat closer to Mark than she had on the journey out, warmed by more than just her shawl. In her mind, she could still see the cabin, could imagine it transformed by care and love into a true home. Here was a man who saw past her size, past her family's reputation, past everything others mocked. Here was a chance at a life filled with purpose and dignity. The path ahead might not be easy, but for the first time, Martha felt truly wanted, truly seen. The wagon creaked homeward through the gathering dusk, each step bringing them closer to whatever tomorrow might hold. Sunday morning painted the Colorado sky in streaks of pink and gold. Frost sparkled on the church windows as families arrived for service, their boots crunching on the frozen ground. The wooden bell rang clear in the crisp air, calling the faithful to worship. Children darted between wagons in the yard, their laughter rising like steam in the cold. Martha watched from near the church steps, clutching her worn Bible. Her sisters had already swept inside, leaving her alone as usual. But today felt different somehow. The memory of Mark showing her their future home yesterday still warmed. Her heart. A commotion erupted near the hitching posts. Two boys, the Miller brothers, nearly grown, had cornered Thomas, the young Ute orphan who sometimes traded carved trinkets in town. They towered over him, shoving him roughly against a post. "Go on, get," the older Miller boy sneered. "Nobody wants your kind here." Thomas stumbled but kept his feet, his face carefully blank. He wore a mixture of traditional clothing and cast-off settler garments, marking him as caught between two worlds. The small wooden figures he'd brought to trade scattered in the dirt. Several adults watched from the church steps, chuckling at the scene. Martha felt her chest tighten. She thought of Mark's words about peace, about seeing worth in all people. Before she could think better of it, her feet were moving. "Leave him be." Her voice rang out stronger than she'd expected, surprising even herself. Martha stepped between Thomas and the Miller boys, her broad frame becoming a shield. The boys fell back a step, more from shock than fear. No one had ever seen shy, fat Martha stand up to anyone before. A murmur ran through the watching crowd. "Miss Hargrave," the younger Miller said, recovering his sneer, "you defending Indians now?" Martha's hands trembled, but she held her ground. "I'm defending a child of God, same as any of us." Quiet footsteps approached behind her. Mark appeared at her side, his presence steady and calm. He placed a gentle hand on Thomas's shoulder, saying nothing but making his position clear. PH, the Amish man and his woman, taking up with savages," someone muttered from the crowd. Others nodded, faces darkening with disapproval. Pastor Green finally emerged from the church, drawn by the commotion. He hesitated, clearly torn between keeping peace and doing right. Perhaps we should all head inside," he suggested weakly. Then, catching Martha's eye, he added softly, "Thank you, Martha. Kindness is never wrong." Thomas bent to gather his scattered carvings. Martha knelt to help him, ignoring the dirt on her Sunday dress. The boy's quick fingers sorted through his treasures until he found a particular bead, smoothed and polished, with intricate patterns carved into its surface. He pressed it into Martha's palm without a word, but his eyes spoke volumes of gratitude. Inside the church, the whispers continued like rustling leaves. Martha felt the stares as she took her family's usual pew. Clara and Rachel slid away from her slightly, exchanging knowing looks. Luce's face was thunderous, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack nuts. The service passed in a blur. Martha hardly heard the sermon, too aware of the wooden bead warming in her pocket and the mix of pride and fear in her heart. She had never stood up to anyone before. The feeling was terrifying and somehow wonderful. The ride home was silent as a grave. Louise gripped the reins so tight his knuckles showed white, while her sisters whispered and giggled behind their hands. Only when they reached the farm did Luce's rage explode. "Fool girl." He slammed through the door, making the whole house shudder. "Standing up for that Indian boy, making us look like savage lovers. Bad enough you're courting that peculiar Amish man. Now this." Martha fled to her room, but his words followed her up the stairs. "You're bringing shame on this family." As if we didn't have enough troubles. That evening, kneeling beside her narrow bed, Martha pulled out Thomas's carved bead. Moonlight caught the careful patterns, circles within circles, like ripples in a pond. She thought of Mark's stream, how water blessed all it touched, asking nothing in return. "Lord," she whispered, "give me strength to be kind even when it's hard. Even when others mock. Help me be worthy of the love you've shown me." Outside her window, snow began to fall. Fat flakes drifted down in the stillness, gradually coating the world in pure white. Martha watched until her candle guttered, finding peace in the gentle silence. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she had found her voice today. She had chosen mercy over fear. For the first time in her life, she felt truly strong. A week after the church incident, the townsfolk's attitudes shifted like weather in spring. Whispers still followed Martha and Mark, but curiosity began to temper the mockery. Even Mrs. Miller, mother to the boys who had tormented Thomas, suggested they should plan a proper wedding supper. "It ain't right to let them marry without celebrating," she declared at the general store, "even if it is unusual." Word spread through town like wildfire. Soon, ladies gathered at the church to discuss arrangements, their voices a mix of judgment and secret admiration for Mark's unwavering devotion. They had watched him endure taunts without anger, work harder than most men, and treat Martha with a gentleness that made some of them question their own hasty opinions out at the Hargrave farm. Martha stood in the kitchen with her sisters, their hands deep in bread dough. Flour dusted the worn table as they worked. For once, Clara's sharp tongue stayed still, and Rachel's usual smirk faded as they watched their middle sister. Martha hummed hymns Mark had taught her, her voice soft but steady as she shaped the loaves. "You're different," Clara said suddenly, studying Martha's face. "You stand straighter now." Martha just smiled, continuing to knead. The dough felt alive beneath her fingers, full of possibility. Next came the pies, apple and berry, their crusts woven in careful lattice. The familiar work filled the kitchen with warmth and sweet scents. Outside, the steady rhythm of hammering echoed across the yard. Mark had arrived early with fresh-cut lumber, determined to repair the sagging porch before winter truly set in. Martha brought him water throughout the day, each time pausing to watch him work. His quiet strength showed in every careful measurement, every precise cut. Luis huddled in his corner rocker, a bottle his only companion. His bitter gaze followed Martha's movements, but she barely noticed anymore. Mark's respect had taught her to see past her father's darkness. As evening approached, Martha slipped upstairs to try on her wedding dress. It wasn't fancy, just plain brown wool with neat stitching, but she had made every stitch herself. Standing before the spotted mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The girl who had always hunched to hide was gone. In her place stood a woman with clear eyes and lifted chin. For the first time in her life, Martha felt truly beautiful. "Supper's ready." Rachel called up the stairs. The family gathered around the table, joined by Mark as had become custom. Martha served the meal, simple fare of beans and cornbread, while her sisters set out plates. The quiet was broken only by the clink of forks and the occasional creak of Luce's chair as he reached for his bottle. Suddenly, Luce's fist crashed down on the table, making the dishes jump. "I won't have it," he shouted, words slurred. "Won't let my daughter marry a man who can't pay his way. These debts hang over us like vultures, and you think I'll give Martha to a penniless Amish farmer?" Mark set down his fork carefully. His voice remained level, though his eyes held steel. "A man's worth is not measured in coin, Mr. Hargrave, but in faithfulness. I offer your daughter a life of honest work and steady love. Faithfulness won't pay the banker." Luis staggered to his feet, swaying. "Your precious peaceful ways won't save this farm." He lurched toward the door, yanked it open, and stumbled out into the night. The slam echoed through the house like a gunshot. Silence fell heavy as a winter blanket. Clara stared at her plate, while Rachel twisted her napkin nervously. But Martha reached across the table and took Mark's hand. "I will stand with you," she whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Whatever comes, I choose you." Mark's fingers tightened around hers. No more words were needed. Later that night, they said goodbye on the porch Mark had mended. Frost glittered on the new boards, and stars blazed overhead in the crystal-clear sky. Martha felt the cold air on her cheeks, but her heart burned warm with certainty. She watched Mark mount his horse and ride away, knowing that each challenge only strengthened their bond. Clara appeared in the doorway behind her. "You really love him, don't you?" Martha nodded, still watching Mark's figure disappear into the darkness. "He sees me," she said simply. "Really sees me." The sisters stood together, watching their breath mist in the starlight. Something had shifted between them, like ice beginning to thaw. Tomorrow would bring more preparations, more whispers, more struggles. But tonight, Martha's heart was full of fragile, precious hope. The evening before the wedding supper, frost crept across the window panes of the Hargrave farmhouse. Martha sat by candlelight, carefully pressing her brown wool dress. Her hands moved steadily over the fabric, while Clara and Rachel chattered about tomorrow's gathering. Even their usual sharp words had softened, touched by the simple joy Martha radiated. But Luis was missing, again. "Pa took the wagon to town hours ago," Rachel said, peering through the frosted glass. "Reckon he's at the saloon." Martha's heart sank, but she kept working. The iron swept back and forth, smoothing wrinkles like prayer smooths worry. She would not let fear steal her happiness tonight. In town, lanterns blazed at the Golden Nugget Saloon. Inside, Luz Hargrave slumped at a card table, whiskey bottle close at hand. Pride and shame warred in his bloodshot eyes as he watched his meager pile of coins dwindle. "One more hand," he slurred, fumbling in his coat. "I got something better." Then coin. Papers crinkled as he pulled out the farm deed. The other player's eyes gleamed in the smoky light. Dawn broke gray and bitter. Martha rose early to start breakfast, but before she could light the stove, pounding at the door startled her. Rachel yanked it open to find Mrs. Miller, breathless with gossip. "Your pa," she gasped. "He lost everything at cards last night." Signed. "Away the whole farm to cover his debts." The words fell like stones in still water. Clara screamed. Rachel collapsed against the doorframe. Martha stood frozen, her mind refusing to grasp the truth. They found Louise sprawled on the porch, reeking of whiskey. The deed was gone. Their home, their land, their future, all lost in a night of drunken gambling. "Pa, how could you?" Clara wailed, shaking him. "Where will we go?" Louise only groaned, shame radiating from his crumpled form. Martha sank onto the porch steps, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard, shadows that now belonged to someone else. Hoofbeats announced Mark's arrival. He dismounted quickly, face grave. Word had reached him on his way to bring wedding supplies. "Is it true?" he asked softly. Before Martha could answer, townsfolk began gathering. Wagons rattled up the road, bringing neighbors drawn by the scandal. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Mighty convenient for that Amish fellow," someone muttered. "Gets the girl and the water rights too. Probably planned it with them Utes," another voice added. "They've been seen talking plenty." Louise staggered to his feet, anger replacing shame. "That's it," he shouted, pointing at Mark. "Been plotting with them Indians all along, ain't you? Wanting our water, our land." "No." Martha stood, her voice stronger. Then she knew she had. "Mark has done nothing but show kindness. This shame belongs to you, Pa, not him." But the whispers grew louder. Years of suspicion toward outsiders, toward anyone different, bubbled to the surface. Mark stood silent, his face etched with sorrow rather than anger. The day dragged endless. Neighbors drifted away, leaving the family to their grief. Clara and Rachel huddled together, while Luis retreated to his bottle. Martha moved through familiar chores mechanically, setting out their last supper in this home. They ate without speaking. The only sounds were forks scraping plates and Luce's occasional muttered curses. Martha felt the joy she had so carefully built crumbling away. Every dream of belonging, of finally having a place to call her own, seemed to mock her now. After the dishes were cleared, Martha slipped outside. Stars pricked the black sky, cold and distant. She clutched Thomas's carved wooden bead, rolling it between her fingers as tears fell freely. "Please, Lord," she whispered, "don't let Mark suffer for Pa's sin. He's good and true. Please don't let hate destroy what you've blessed." Inside, she heard Clara's voice rise in anger. "This is your fault, Martha. If you hadn't caught his eye. With your foolish hopes, bringing shame on us all," Rachel added. "What respectable man would want any of us now?" Luz's bottle thudded against the wall. "Curse that peaceful fool. Curse his gentle ways. Look where peace has got us homeless." Martha pressed the wooden bead to her heart, feeling the rough edges dig into her palm. The night wind carried the bitter words away, replacing them with memories of Mark's steady voice. Peace cannot be earned by shouting louder than the crowd. But tonight, peace felt as distant as the stars above. Morning brought no peace to Colorado Springs. The late January wind whipped through the streets, carrying whispers that grew into shouts of anger. Outside the general store, men gathered in tight circles, their breath frosting in the cold air as they spoke of Mark Yoder in harsh tones. First he takes the fat Hargrave girl, now the farm too. Tom Wilson spat into the snow. Mighty strange. Timing. Seen him talking with them Utes plenty, Ed Miller added, adjusting his rifle strap. Planning something, mark my words. Taking white farms one by one. The whispers spread like wildfire through town. By afternoon, the mood had turned dangerous. Men checked their weapons, casting dark glances toward Mark's homestead. Even the women at the quilting circle spoke of Martha with pity mixed with scorn. Poor thing, Mrs. Miller clucked. Blinded by the first man to show her attention. Now look what's happened. As evening approached, lanterns bobbed through the gathering darkness toward the white-painted church. Pastor Green had called a meeting to discuss the Hargrave farm situation, but hearts were already hardened with suspicion. Mark rode in slowly on his bay horse, his black hat dusted with snow. He dismounted carefully, tying his horse to the hitching post as if it were any other evening. But the hostile stares that followed his every move told a different story. A group of men blocked his path to the church steps. Tom Wilson stepped forward, fists clenched. Time for you to leave, Amish. We don't take kindly to folk who steal farms through trickery. Or side with Indians against their own kind, Ed Miller added. Hand resting on his holstered pistol, Mark stood quietly, hands open at his sides. I have stolen nothing. Louise Hargrave's choices were his own. Lair! Someone shouted from the crowd. The mob pressed closer, anger crackling like static before a storm. Suddenly, Martha pushed through the crowd, her brown wool dress whipping in the wind. She planted herself beside Mark, chin raised despite. Her trembling hands, "Stop this. Mark has done nothing wrong." "Step aside, girl," Wilson growled. "This ain't your concern." "It is my concern." Martha's voice grew stronger. "You would harm a good man because you fear what you don't understand." Mark placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, then faced the mob. "I will not fight you," he said clearly. "My strength is in the Lord's peace, not the rifle." He raised his empty hands toward the angry faces before him. "Do what you must, but know that violence brings only more violence." The crowd shifted uneasily. They had expected resistance, angry words, perhaps even a fight. Mark's calm dignity unsettled them more than shouts ever could. Pastor Green finally emerged from the church, his lined face troubled. For a long moment he stood silent, watching his congregation teeter on the edge of violence. Then he stepped between Mark and the mob. "Brothers," he said wearily, "we are better than this. The Lord commands us to love our neighbors, not threaten them without cause." "But Pastor," Wilson protested, "he's working with the Indians." "I have seen no evidence of plotting," Pastor Green replied. "Only a man who treats all God's children with respect. Now go home, all of you. Let peace prevail this night." Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd dispersed. Some still muttered threats, but the dangerous energy had broken. Martha sagged with relief against Mark's steady presence. Later that evening, they sat together on the Hargrave Farms porch. The property might be lost, but for now it was still home. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, softening the harsh edges of the world. Louise stumbled out, whiskey bottle in hand. "Look at him," he sneered. "At Mark. Won't even fight for what's his. Weak, that's what you are." Martha rose, anger flashing in her eyes. "He is stronger than you'll ever be, Pa. It takes more courage to stand peaceful against hatred than to raise a fist or drink away your shame." Louis staggered back as if struck. For a moment, hurt and recognition crossed his face. Then he turned and lurched away into the darkness, leaving only footprints in the fresh snow. Martha sank back down beside Mark, watching the white flakes gather on the porch railing. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "What if the whole town turns against us? What if they drive you away?" Mark took her hand gently. "God's truth cannot be silenced by angry words or threats. Peace seems weak to those who know only force, but it has a power all its own." Like water wearing away stone, Martha murmured, remembering how the stream near Mark's cabin had carved its patient path through rock. They sat together in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the land. The snow continued falling, covering the angry footprints of the mob with its quiet blanket of white. 2 days after the confrontation at the church, hoofbeats echoed through the morning frost. Thomas, the young Ute boy, rode beside his uncle Chaska, a respected tribal leader. They approached the bank where townsfolk had gathered for business. Mr. Calhoun stood on the wooden sidewalk, ledger in hand. As the Utes dismounted, Thomas clutched a leather document pouch close to his chest, his dark eyes scanning the growing crowd. "We come to speak truth," Chaska announced, his voice carrying authority that made even the skeptical townsfolk pause. "About the man you call Mark Yoder." Inside the bank's front room, chairs were quickly arranged. Martha and Mark sat quietly while Luis hunched in the corner, his face drawn with worry. Clara and Rachel whispered behind their hands until Calhoun silenced them with a stern look. Chaska withdrew carefully preserved papers from Thomas's pouch. "These documents show Mark Yoder defended our water rights against railroad men who would steal them. He spoke for our people when others would take more land." The banker adjusted his spectacles, examining the papers with growing interest. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Chaska explained how Mark had helped protect their treaty claims, not undermine them as rumors claimed. "He seeks balance," Chaska continued, "between all who share the water. This is wisdom our people respect." Martha watched tears form in Thomas's eyes as he added softly, "He treats us like people, not enemies." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their previous certainty crumbling. Mr. Calhoun studied Mark's calm face for a long moment before speaking. "Perhaps," the banker said slowly, "there is a way to resolve this that benefits all." He turned to Mark. "If you will oversee repairs to the valley's irrigation ditches, sharing your Amish methods, I will consider Luis Hargrave's debt forgiven." Luis collapsed to his knees, shoulders shaking with sobs. "I don't deserve such mercy," he choked out. "I will help gladly," Mark replied simply. Martha approached Thomas and his uncle, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Thank you for your courage in speaking truth." Clara and Rachel stood frozen, realization dawning that their scorned sister's choice of husband had saved their family from ruin. They exchanged glances of shame. As evening settled over the Hargrave farm, neighbors began arriving with covered dishes and warm bread. The kitchen filled with the scent of shared food and quiet conversation. Even those who had doubted Mark now offered handshakes and cautious smiles. In a quiet moment, Luis found Martha alone by the hearth. His hands trembled as he touched her shoulder. "I was wrong, child," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "About everything." Martha covered his hand with her own, and father and daughter shared a moment of healing in the firelight's glow. Lanterns cast a warm glow through the windows of the line shack, now transformed from its humble beginnings. Fresh-cut pine boards gleamed on the floor, and white curtains Martha had sewn herself fluttered at the windows. The smell of fresh-baked pies and golden cornbread filled the cozy space as neighbors crowded inside, their boots stamping snow at the threshold. Martha stood beside Mark near the stone hearth, her plain brown dress adorned only with a small white collar she had embroidered herself. Yet she glowed with an inner light that made her more beautiful than any store-bought finery could achieve. Mark wore his best black coat, his steady eyes never leaving his bride's face. Clara and Rachel moved through the crowd with platters of food, their usual sharp tongues silenced by the gentle joy that filled the room. They passed out slices of apple pie and fresh bread, their faces softened with a new humility as they served those they once mocked. In a corner, Luis Hargrave sat quietly, his hands steady and his eyes clear for the first time in years. He watched his middle daughter with wonder, seeing not the burden he had claimed her to be, but a woman of quiet strength. Near the hearth, Thomas perched on a wooden stool, his skilled hands working a piece of pine into what looked like a pair of doves. He glanced up occasionally, offering shy smiles to Martha, who had defended him when others would not. Pastor Green stepped forward, and the room hushed. The simple vows were spoken with clear, steady voices. When Mark placed the ring on Martha's finger, his gentle touch spoke of years of tender care to come. Then Mark and Martha turned to face their guests, joining their voices in an old Amish hymn. Their voices trembled at first, but grew stronger together, the German words rising to the rafters. Gottes die lieb, lasst mich erlisten. Gottes die lieb, liebt euch mich. Outside, the winter night stretched cold and vast over the snow-covered hills, but inside the little shack, warmth and hope blazed bright as summer. The woman once cruelly called the Fat One now sat at the head table as wife, daughter, sister, and friend, beloved in the eyes of her husband and her God. As the evening drew to a close, Martha bowed her head in quiet prayer. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her heart full of gratitude. The lamplight flickered gently across her peaceful face, while the last notes of the wedding hymn seemed to linger in the rafters, blessing all beneath them with its simple truth about love's power to transform. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.